We're going to ride that. We're not letting that go. But every passage people use to say you don't have to keep the Torah, they are misinterpreting that passage. We learned years ago, whenever it comes to something that appears to be saying you don't have to keep the law, we were taught to ask one simple question. What law? But let's move on. The next point we want to go to is Psalms, which is Tehillim, chapter 51 and verse 5. Listen to what Brother Dawid wrote. He says, "Behold, I was born in iniquity." Then he says, "In sin my mother conceived me." So here's the question. How are we born in iniquity? Conceived in sin. Think about that. Of course, in our previous segment, it was the fall. This is the result of the fall of mankind. The fall of Adam and Chauah. This is what happened. Now, we are in a condition where we are subjugated to the opponent, which is why the carnal mind is an opponent to Elohim. Okay? It's our natural state. Let's look at a few things. Because this condition, what we're going to see, has been passed down from generation to generation. And that is part of the nature, when you think about human nature. And we were asking the question, in the very first intro, whether or not human nature was by inheritance, which is nature, or was it by nurture based on what we've experienced? And it's actually a combination of both. But the part of what we're going through right now, because you have some people who don't believe that man is born inherently evil. But in actuality, that's exactly how we're born. And as a matter of fact, that's what Brother Dawid here is saying. I was born in iniquity, and sin my mother conceived me. Okay? But let's look at some other examples, and let's build on that. So in Job, chapter 15, starting at verse 14, listen to what he says. Listen to this piece of a conversation. "What is man that he should be clean? What is he who is born of a woman that he should be righteous?" So, and it's not something that he's saying necessarily towards the women. He's talking about every human being, because every human being comes through the legs of a woman. Every human being. Okay? He says, the next verse, 15. "Behold, he puts no trust in his holy ones." When he says that, he's talking about the malachim, the angelic beings. Why? Because we found out in previous lessons, there was folly among them. They became corrupted. Not all of them, but those who followed after the opponent. They were corrupt. So listen to what he said. "Behold, he puts no trust in his holy ones. Yes, the heavens are not clean in his sight." So, and he's making this contrast. If the heavens themselves have been corrupted, how much more the physical plane? Listen to what he said, verse 16. "How much less one who is abominable and corrupt, a man who drinks iniquity like water." Think about that. And allow Abba to just keep putting these things together. Now, there is still hope. We're going to get to that later. All right? At the end of this lesson. But the thought, again, we're talking about what is human nature. In order for us to be successful in our walk with the Most High, in order for us to succeed at being everything that the Most High desires us to be, we have to get a better understanding of who we are. As was stated, looking at that man in the mirror. Okay? So, let's go to Yeshayahu, which is Isaiah chapter 57, starting at verse 1. It says, "The righteous perish, and no one lays it to heart. Merciful men are taken away, and no one considers that the righteous is taken away from the evil. he enters into peace. They rest in their beds, each one who walks in his uprightness. And let me just stop right here, because this passage is actually tying into something that we just mentioned. How death is often equated with going to sleep, resting. Okay, keep that in mind. Verse 3. But listen to what he says from this point on. He says, but draw near here, you sons of a sorceress. Listen to the language. Just listen to it. And keeping in mind everything we've been talking about. The nachash, the serpent, but also having a meaning to whisper, in the sense of casting a spell. Think about that. Verse 3 again. But draw near here, you sons of a sorceress, you offspring of adulterers and prostitutes. You see how he's utilizing the idea that they are the children. Whom do you mock? Against whom do you make a wide mouth and stick out your tongue? See, one of the things that's popular today is people taking these pictures and, they put up these different hand signs and they stick their tongue out. Why do you think they're doing that? When we were children, we would say, na 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 na, then we stick our tongue out at somebody. Where do we get these things from? The Creator, he's talking about that. It's as if whenever we're doing things contrary to his way, it's like as we're doing that, na 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 na, sticking our tongue out towards him. This is what he's saying. Whom do you mock? Oh, and before I go any further, let's also bring this back to the forefront. He is talking to Israel, his people. He's talking to his people. Don't forget about that. Okay? Whom do you mock? Against whom do you make a wide mouth and stick out your tongue? Aren't you children of disobedience and offspring of falsehood? You who inflame yourselves among the oaks under every green tree, who kill the children in the valleys under the clefts of the rocks. Do you hear that? There is an offspring. See? We all start off this way. In our will, we talk about the adoption at some point. All right? Let's go to Ephesians chapter 2, verses 1 and 2. It says, you were made alive when you were dead in transgressions and sins. Now see, do you see how the word now is coming together? He's making this contrast. You were made alive. See, you're already alive. Right? But he says, you were made alive when you were dead in transgression and sins. In other words, let's take your mind back. When they partook of that forbidden fruit, when their eyes were open, guess what? They died. They died. Something happened in them. Something changed in them. And throughout Holy Scripture, he keeps mentioning this idea of being alive and being dead, but he's talking about people who are still alive. Verse 1 again. You were made alive when you were dead in transgressions and sins, in which you once walked. See? In which you once walked according to the course of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air, the spirit who now works in the children of disobedience. This is what he's talking about. We all were a part of that at some point, until we received the Most High. And it is by receiving the Most High that he now takes us to himself, and he separates us from the rest of the world. When he sanctifies us, he sets us apart. He's pulling us out. Think about the call. Come out of her, my people. So when we come out of her, we're coming out of this world system, and we're now being joined and connected to the Most High. This is where our sanctity and our holiness comes from. But let's move on. Listen to this. John chapter 8, starting at verse 42. And here again, YHWH, he's talking to Israel. And I'm emphasizing that today because the truth of the matter is Israel is exactly the same. You always have a faithful few, but the majority are outside of the will of Yah, period. Whether you accept that or not. All you got to do is look at them. I don't care if they call themselves Hebrews, Israelites, or Jews. I don't care if they black. I don't care if they white. They are not adhering to the fullness of the Torah. It's mix and match. What I mean by mix and match. Throughout the course of the history of Israel, one of our problems was removing something from the word and putting something back in the word that didn't belong there in the first place. That's what I mean when I say mix and match. Okay? He said we're not supposed to take anything from his word. We're not supposed to add anything to his word. So when either of those things are done, guess what? We are no longer observing his word. We have corrupted it. And his word has been corrupted. But what he's in the process of doing, he's in the process, once again, of bringing people back. Just like he told Jeremiah, to stand and ask for the old paths. See? John 8:42. YHWH said unto them, and keep in mind, he's talking to Israel. If Elohim were your father. So when he says if, that implies somebody else is. Let's move on. If Elohim were your father, you would love me. For I proceeded forth and came from Elohim. Neither came I of myself, but he sent me. Let me just add to that, if I may. Now I know this is a reference to Mashiach YHWH, okay? But one of the things that we also have to understand and accept when it comes to being a representative of the Most High, whether you be a prophet, whether you be a priest, if a true prophet or a true priest is being rejected, it is because whoever's doing the rejecting is still connected to their father, and they have not yet been adopted by Elohim. Don't take my word for it. Pray about it and ask Abba if that's true. Once again, John 8:42. YHWH said unto them, if Elohim were your father, you would love me. For I proceeded forth and came from Elohim, neither came I of myself, but he sent me. Why do you not understand my speech? Even because you cannot hear my word. Listen, Shema Yisrael, listen. Verse 44, you are of your father the devil, and the lust of your father you will do. He was a murderer from the beginning, and abode not in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he speaks a lie, he speaks of his own, for he is a liar and the father of it. Now, this is what we got to keep in mind. When the serpent, as he was being moved by the opponent, was speaking to Chauah, okay? One of the things that he says, right? He says, you will not surely die. That was a lie. But before he got to that lie, he did something. Now listen to this. In 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 15, we want to make a comparison. This is Brother Chauah once again. Listen to what he says, though. For though you have 10,000 tutors in Messiah, you don't have many fathers. For in Messiah YHWH, I became your father through the good news. And this is what he's saying. This is the thought. When we look at a parable that the Most High gave about the sower who went forth to sow, right? And he gets down to the explanation about the seed. And he says that the seed is the word. So as prophets, priests, etc., teachers, those who have been commissioned to dispense the word of the Most High, it's as if we are dispensing the seed, similar to what Brother Chauah is referring to. And when the seed has been dispensed, if you now become a believer as a result of the seed that a man of Yah dispenses, it is equated to this man becoming your father, because he has begotten you by the word. Now some people may say, hold up, brother, that's not his word, it's the Most High's word. You're absolutely right, but the Most High is still working through the individual. As we talked before, some people have an issue with the term rabbi, right? Remember we talked about that? Well, you're not supposed to call no man rabbi. At the same time, he said you're not supposed to call any man father either, right? But here we got Brother Chauah, after the fact, referred to himself as being a father. Why? Because he begot them by the word. It's understanding. Carnal Mind. Sometimes it's not about what you read, it's about the thought behind the word. You don't have a problem with somebody being called rabbi. All of that, the only reason that's being magnified is because you got black Hebrew Israelites and they're going to say anything to go against the white rabbi. If we understand and we acknowledge us as being who we are, these white rabbis, where do you think they got it from? If that was a point in history that the Khazars all converted to practice the ways of our forefathers, who do you think taught them? Our forefathers. It wasn't an issue like that. And I'm using this as an example in regard to the term father, right? But I wanted to read this, not even to get off into that, my apologies, but our word is what it is. Brother Chauah was saying that he had begotten them by the word. The point that we want to make to associate with the opponent is that the opponent had now begotten Chauah and Adam by his word. Yahweh Elohim said not to eat of this forbidden fruit. The serpent comes along, he says, Af ki amah Elohim. Has mighty ones really said? Think about that. Now, here's the other part to this, okay, so we can get a better understanding and we'll be on the same page as we're moving along. Think about an assembly line, right? Let's say automobile manufacturer. One of the parts is defective. The whole shipment of parts, whatever that part may be, is defective. But they don't know that. So on the assembly line, everybody's putting this part in, putting this part in, putting this part in. Everything that comes out is defective. Point being is this. Once Adam and Chauah had been affected, infected, contaminated, polluted, everything that comes from them is coming in the same pollution, which is why David says that he was born in iniquity, he was conceived in sin, because of what took place in the garden. It affected humanity up until the point of an individual accepting the Messiah. In 1 John 5:19, we know that we are of Elohim. That's one side. And the whole world lies in the power of the evil one, or in wickedness. You have two sides, family. You're either connected to Mashiach Yahushua, or you are connected to the opponent. Period. Period. You can't straddle the fence, because if you straddle the fence, guess what? The Creator considers you to be on that side. In other words, I would want you to be all in. You got to be all in. Now, being all in, it means that you have made a conscious decision that this is what you're going to do with your life. It doesn't mean that you're going to be perfect. I have to make that clear. But in your mind, you decided, I'm going to walk and live my life according to the Torah. And if I fall, I'm going to get back up and I'm going to continue walking in the Torah. That's what you have decided. In other words, like Dawid said in one place, my heart is fixed. When our heart is fixed and we have made the conscious choice, I'm going to follow Mashiach, Yahushua, wherever he goes. That's when we are part of that side. We're going to slip up. We're going to make mistakes. But that's where the graciousness and the mercifulness and the loving kindness of the Most High comes into play. Okay, but let's keep moving. Now, the point being that we're going through all of this in regard to human nature, mankind became subjugated to the opponent. All right? So I have a few things here we want to look at. Now, all of this took place through the deception of Adam Chauah. But here's a question. How is it that we're stuck in this mental state? How? So we need to learn how our mind works. So I have a few things that I wanted to read. Okay? And in our next segment, I'll put some of this information down in our notes so we can reiterate, and plus what I've been doing also for those who have been following along. Whenever I have the bullet points in the beginning, I typically list those bullet points under the video once it's been uploaded and available for viewing. Okay, just to let you know. So now we're going to read several things, so I just ask you all to please bear with me. There's a reason why we're going through this. All right. First thing, it's called, first section rather, Pavlov's dog, a background. All right. How did experiments on the digestive response in dogs lead to one of the most important discoveries in psychology? Ivan Pavlov was a noted Russian physiologist who won the 1904 Nobel Prize for his work studying digestive processes. While studying digestion in dogs, Pavlov noted an interesting occurrence. His canine subjects would begin to salivate whenever an assistant entered the room. In his digestive research, Pavlov and his assistants would introduce a variety of edible and non-edible items and measure the saliva production that the items produced. Salivation, he noted, is a reflexive process. It occurs automatically in response to a specific stimulus and is not under conscious control. These are very important pieces here, because what's happening right now, man is coming to understand how the mind works. Keep that in mind. However, Pavlov noted that the dogs would often begin salivating in the absence of food and smell. He quickly realized that this salivary response was not due to an automatic physiological process. The next section, Pavlov's theory of classical conditioning. Based on his observations, Pavlov suggested that the salivation was a learned process. A learned response. Pavlov's dog subjects were responding to the sight of the research assistant's white lab coats, which the animals had come to associate with the presentation of food. Unlike the salivary response to the presentation of food, which is an unconditioned reflex, salivating to the expectation of food is a conditioned reflex. Pavlov then focused on investigating exactly how these conditioned responses are learned or acquired. In a series of experiments, he set out to provoke a conditioned response to a previously neutral stimulus. He opted to use food as the unconditioned stimulus, or the stimulus that evokes a response naturally and automatically. The sound of a metronome was chosen to be the neutral stimulus. The dogs would first be exposed to the sound of the ticking metronome, and then the food was immediately presented. After several conditioning trials, Pavlov noted that the dogs began to salivate after hearing the metronome, a stimulus which was neutral in and of itself had been superimposed upon the action of the inborn alimentary reflex. Pavlov wrote of the results. We observed that after several repetitions of the combined stimulation, the sounds of the metronome had acquired the property of stimulating salivary secretion. In other words, the previously neutral stimulus, the metronome, had become what is known as a conditioned stimulus that then provoked a conditioned response, salivation. Okay, this comes from verywellmind.com. Okay, what does all this mean? I'm sure you may be asking. But now think about this. They stumbled upon this and they found out how the mind works. Okay? If a man, right, and this is a doctor, Ivan Pavlov, if a man has learned that another man can be conditioned how to think, how to feel, how to respond, and we're going to see in a minute. How much more can a being that you cannot see do to an individual? Think about that. If man has learned how to condition other men, how much more has the opponent? Think about that. Let's read another example. A closer look. The participant in the experiment, matter of fact, before I read, this is about Dr. John B. Watson, okay? And this experiment was called Little Albert, all right? The participant in the experiment was a child that Watson and Rayner called Albert B., but is